Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a new series. I'm going to start just by Rabbi Kalman is not here, told me he's on his way to New York. So I am going to start with the sponsor, and also we'll do a dedication of our class. But hold on, let me just get my slideshow going here. Okay, the series is sponsored by the Okrent and Bogdansky families in memory of Howard F. Okrent and Chaim Ben Dov, Zichronam Livracha. May we be blessed with good health and long life. Thank you to the
Hey,
sponsors. And thank God we are now in a stage where we are only hoping for our last three hostages, their bodies to be returned. And may this class be in the merit of that and in the success of our soldiers and the refuah shlema, refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf of everyone who needs it, and besorot tovot. And we are starting a new series. So what we're going to be doing in this series over the next, it's six classes. It's not 6 weeks because I'm going to take a break Hanukkah time, but it is six classes. And the scope of our course is the first 10 years of the history of the state of Israel. And these are very formative years. Sometimes we feel like they're kind of eclipsed. Everybody knows about 1948 and the War of
oh,
Independence. Everybody knows about 1967 and the Six-Day War. Sometimes we forget
well,
about
thank
what
you, Shulie.
happened
So are
in
you?
and those events are perhaps slightly less dramatic, but incredibly important because basically what we have to do is we have to go from being communities and idealists. Yeah, everybody please mute yourselves. Um, to we went from being
It's really a
communities
mess.
and idealists to people.
I mean, don't people
Wait, do
about
we
this
still need to mute everybody?
election?
Ma Baya, we're having a
7%.
problem. Hold
Well,
on.
whatever the reasons were, but
Okay, I'm
same
muting
people.
everybody. Yes, just not me. Okay. Beseder, we're good. We're gonna go back. Yes. All right. Here we go. Nice and quiet. Um, okay. So we have to go from a time period uh, where we're really trying to create a nation, to 1948, where we are warriors. And finally, that's over. And now, how do we actually go about the day-to-day life of being a nation state? How do we secure our borders? How do we absorb aliyah? Okay, which is what we're going to do in our next class, a huge aliyah. How do we create a functional economy? How do we have politics, especially politics in the craziness of the Jewish world where everybody has so many different opinions? How do we create a Judaism, right? The state of Israel, Zionism, was partly the question of what to do about the Jews, but partly the question of what to do about Judaism, right? Ahad Ha'am and Herzl. What do we do about Judaism in this state? Can we create a new slash old culture? And all those are questions we're going to be dealing with. And most of those questions are questions we are still dealing with today. And I've said this many times since the beginning of the war 2 years ago. We feel a lot like what's been happening in the past 2 years is almost like a second war of independence, fighting on many different fronts, trying to reestablish ourselves in the consensus of the world. And we'll see that a lot of things that we're going to talk about have similarities today. So the class we're going to do today is security challenges in these first 10 years, right? The aftermath of 1948, the challenges, particularly of terror infiltrations, uh, in the 1950s, and kind of coming to an end with the Sinai Mivtza Kadesh, with the Sinai mission, right? Sort of a war, but very, very short, in 1956, and then the results of it in 1957. So that's what we're going to be doing today. The photograph is kind of the Israeli version of the Iwo Jima, right? Raising the flag on Iwo Jima. This is raising the flag in Eilat. Right? Eilat, as we're going to see in a moment, is the final conquest of the War of Independence. When the troops get down there and they capture the police station in Rashrash, which there really is not a city of Eilat just yet. They realize that they hadn't brought with them a flag, so they take out a white sheet, they draw on it with with ink, with marker, they create a flag and they put it up. So this seemed like a fitting picture for our security challenges. Okay, basic timeline. Obviously, all our timelines are going to be taking place in the same 10 years, right? But we're going to focus on different things each time. So here we really want to talk about first 1948 and post 1948, right? So the War of Independence actually begins when the UN declares votes on partition, right? The day after, the partition plan is November 29th, 1947. The very next day, November 30th, the Arabs of the land of Israel start to attack. There's a civil war. May 14th, or the 5th of Iyar, 1948, the British High Commissioner leaves Palestine. Israel declares statehood, and the very next day, the Arab nations declare war on Israel. So we have that two-stage war. The War of Independence is a very long war. Only to be challenged by the current war. Um, and there are many stages to it. In September 1948, the battles are over in Jerusalem. We're going to see what happens in Jerusalem. And in March of 1949, Haganah finally takes the Negev till Eilat, and the war is over. Okay, ceasefire agreements are begun already in January of 1949 with Jordan. Okay, and with Egypt, because most of the war, most of the battles are over. Ceasefire agreements take place from January to July, with Egypt, with Lebanon, with Jordan, and finally with Syria in July. Part of those agreements include return of prisoners of war from those countries. The one country that we were at war with that we do not have a ceasefire agreement with still today is Iraq. Okay, they do not sign a ceasefire agreement with us. We're going to talk about what those ceasefire agreements mean. Okay. Meanwhile, other aftermaths of the war. November 49, the first soldiers are interred in the new Mount Herzl Cemetery, meaning soldiers were obviously buried before that, but Har Herzl is created towards the end of 1949. Also towards the end of 1949, the creation of the United Nations Relief Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, which of course still infamously exists today. In the 1950s, as we're going to see, the major security challenge is with those infiltrations. We have a very short-lived unit called Unit 101. It's created in the middle of 1953. It's disbanded by the beginning of 1954, or rather, it's incorporated into the paratroopers, but we still have reprisal raids by paratroopers, March 1955, very important one called Black Arrow. And finally, to bring this kind of a security era to a close, we have Operation Kadesh, the Sinai campaign, which lasts for 8 days, at the end of October, at the beginning of November. And a few months later, Israel, under pressure from the world, withdraws from the Sinai that they had taken. Okay, so that's just to give us a kind of an outline of the time period. Okay, the maps. Okay, we're going to talk about the ceasefires and what they mean. But first of all, let's just take a look at the maps because the maps are very important. Okay, the partition map, which is the one here on the left, I think it's a map that's pretty familiar to most of us. Okay, Israel is given the eastern part of the Galilee, the two-thirds of the coast, let's say, and the Negev, which is mostly desert, right? They're given the Negev because of the communities. The Arabs are given the Gaza Strip and this kind of area, the further part, the southern part of the coast, the area that we call Judea and Samaria, extending all the way almost to the coast, and the eastern part of the Galilee. And Jerusalem is meant to be international. This is the partition plan that's voted on by the United Nations that Israel celebrates because we don't have any better choices. But when the Arabs go to war against us, Ben-Gurion says the Arabs didn't hold by the plan. We are not holding by the plan either. And when the war is over, the border lines that are drawn, as you can see in the picture here, are still do not include many important areas like Judea and Samaria, like Gaza, like the Golan, like the Sinai, but they are much better borders than what we had gotten in partition. Okay, we get the entirety of the Galilee, we get more of the area inland from the coast, we get half of Jerusalem. Okay, and we'll come back to Jerusalem in this map of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem, of course, is divided between Israeli Jerusalem in the west, Jordanian Jerusalem in the east, the north, and the south. Okay, so those are our basic borders. The areas, and important to note this, the areas that were meant to be part of the Arab state, right, including Gaza, including Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, are now controlled not by Israel, but they're also not controlled by an Arab state, an independent Arab state in the land of Israel. They are controlled by Egypt, right? Gaza controls Egypt as well as the Sinai, of course, and Jordan controls the area of Judea and Samaria. So these areas that were meant to be given to the Arabs are not given to the Arabs of Eretz Israel, but rather to these countries. So that's important to keep in mind. What happens at these ceasefire talks, okay, which begin in Rhodes, okay, continue in Jordan as well as in Switzerland, but the main talks are in Rhodes. And what Israel comes with to these ceasefire agreements is, on the one hand, we are not satisfied with these borders. We would like all of Jerusalem. We would like Judea and Samaria. On the other hand, we understand that we need peace to achieve the goals that we have set out for ourselves, to absorb Aliyah, to increase settlements, communities, right? We need peace to achieve those goals. So we're going to take these borders status quo. However, we are unwilling, we come and there are kind of crazy demands. Like Egypt says, okay, we'll give you full peace if you give us all of the Negev till Beersheba. We are not willing to acquiesce to these demands. We are not willing to acquiesce to the UN Resolution 194, that the Palestinian refugees must return to their lands. So on the one hand, we are willing to compromise, but we are not willing to compromise as much as the Arab states want us to, and we're willing to keep the status quo. Golda Meir says, we're going to have a few quotes from her. She always says things very incisively. She says, "What peace at what price?" She says, "Who can afford to compromise? The rich can afford to compromise. We are beggars. We don't have enough to compromise with." And that's what Golda Meir says. So Israel basically comes away from the ceasefire agreement saying, we accept these borders, we see them as real borders, we will settle in them and develop them, okay? And when we say ceasefire, a ceasefire means no attacks. No attacks by us on you, no attacks by you on us. The Arabs come away with a very different understanding, and that's what we're going to see in the next few slides. The Arabs say the borders are, we see these borders as temporary. We believe that the refugees have the right to return, and therefore you cannot build in any of the places that were taken from them. Ramle, Lud, Haifa, right? This is very much a bone of contention between Israel and the Arabs. Um, and the Arabs also say we will continue to fight, whether it's terror infiltrations or it's preparation for war, stockpiling arms, or through things like boycott, right? The Arab boycott, very much a very important thing in the 1950s, okay? And propaganda. So there are very different understandings from the two sides that come away from these ceasefire agreements. Okay, a few other things that are kind of just finishing up the War of Independence. Okay, prisoners of war. Okay, prisoners of war taken by Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt. The majority, by the way, taken by Jordan. One of the most egregious violations that Jordan does of the idea of taking prisoners of war is when they take the old city at the end of May 1948, they are shocked by the small number of combatants. And so they don't take only combatants as prisoners of war, but they take teenagers and they take women and they take the elderly. And the picture that you see here on the left is when January 12th, 1949, right, after 7 months in captivity in Jordan, the elderly prisoners, as you can see, they are very elderly, are returned by Jordan. Okay? And it's only in March 1949 that the rest of them are returned. So we have these POW agreements where Israel returns their prisoners of war. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan returned their prisoners of war. And so the sons returned to their borders. A much more difficult mission and a very complex and emotional mission is to bring back the bodies of soldiers that are over enemy lines. And this is where Rav Shlomo Goren steps in, right? Rav Shlomo Goren, first chief rabbi of the IDF, one of the he really sets the character of the IDF in terms of kashrut and Shabbat and all the things that our soldiers, despite what's going on with the Haredi world, but to be a religious soldier is possible in the army, and that's largely because of Rabbi Goren. And he says these bodies have to come back. And so he goes on a very complicated mission. First, he has to get permission from enemies to cross into enemy territory. He also has to do a lot of research with the soldiers who are at the various battles to understand where he's even going, right? Who he's bringing back, how he's bringing them back. He goes behind enemy lines with staff. They retrieve 323 bodies. In November of 1949, there's a mass funeral procession that goes through the center of Jerusalem, down King George Street, and goes to the new cemetery in Mount Herzl. So the picture you're seeing here on the right, picture from the archives of Gush Etzion, and this is the procession taking the bodies of the Lamed Hay, of the 35, one of the very, very powerful stories in Gush Etzion, right? The men who came to the aid of the besieged Gush Etzion in January 1948, they were attacked and ambushed on the way as they were walking, right? As they were walking towards the Gush, they were murdered, brutally murdered, and their bodies were mutilated. The bodies were buried temporarily in the cemetery in Kfar Etzion. And then when they were brought back, not all of them were identified properly, and it was very difficult to know how to identify them. And we'll see in the picture here, okay, we have what's called a kever achim, a mass grave, although we do have an amazing story about Rav Aryeh Levine, who was asked to help identify the bodies by using something called Goral Hagra, right? We won't go into this story, but we do have the cemeteries, right? The cemeteries of the war and after the war. So during the war, right, one of the very important cemeteries, which was not used after the war, is in Kiryat Anavim. Okay, if you see in the picture on the right here, this is a picture of the Palmach memorial, the Palmach symbol on the top. The Palmach, of course, the elite special forces unit of the Haganah, who were responsible for many of the vital battles of 1948 and also had many of the casualties of the terrible 6,000 casualties, more than 6,000 of the War of Independence. One third, more than 2,000 are from the Palmach. Okay? The Palmach's base in the Jerusalem area was Kiryat Anavim, right on the outskirts of Jerusalem. It was one of the two Jewish communities on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And that was where they also had the Palmach cemetery. Okay, so up until the state of Israel is declared, and afterwards, throughout the War of Independence, Palmach are buried in the Kiryat Anavim cemetery. And today you can see soldiers who fell in the battle in Nebi Samuel and soldiers who fell in the Castel, right? It's a very significant small cemetery. But we also have Mount Herzl, right? Herzl's bones are brought from Vienna to Eretz Israel and are buried on Mount Herzl, as we'll see in a minute. And that becomes what's called Chalkat Gdolei Haumah, right? The cemetery for the great leaders of the nation. Only some of them chose to be buried there. But the other part of the hill is a military cemetery, one and the main military cemetery in Israel. There are many, unfortunately, many military cemeteries, but Har Herzl is where you have a lot of the monuments and a lot of those who fell in 1948. So you can see this is the graves from Gush Etzion, and on the right here is something that you don't see a lot of in Israel. This is Almoni. Okay, this is an anonymous grave. Israel, we're a very small country. Everybody knows each other. Everybody's related to each other. It's very rare that we have an unknown soldier, right? Unlike, in the United States, you have the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. But we do have unknown soldiers in 1948, largely survivors. Okay, survivors who were the last of their families who came and were sent into battle right away because we had no choice. We didn't have enough soldiers. And they fell and nobody knew who they were. So we do have some stories like that. Today, we're finding out more and more. We're identifying more and more. Um, this is Herzl's
Surely,
grave, Herzl
surely,
being
maybe,
brought, his body being brought
uh,
to put,
surely,
yeah,
maybe you should explain what Rashi Tevot of Palmach is for the people. What is
Palmach,
the Rashi?
right? What does it stand for? Plugot
Yes.
Machat, strike forces. Okay, they were the elite strike forces. Okay, yeah, good.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
um, just Mount Herzl is an empty mountain. Okay, in the western part of the city. If we look back for a minute at our map here, okay, the only place that Jewish Jerusalem could expand in the 1950s and the 1960s, the only direction was to the west. Okay. To the east is Jordan, to the north is Jordan, to the south is Jordan. The only open area is to the west. And that's why we have Mount Herzl in the west, and we have Yad Vashem, and we have the Knesset, and we have uh, Israel Museum and the university and the hospital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so Mount Herzl founded first Herzl and the great leaders, but also the military cemetery. And just while we're talking about cemeteries for a moment, the cemetery of Jerusalem, the traditional cemetery for hundreds of years, is the Mount of Olives. But during the battles, when the old city falls, everything to the east of the old city also is under Jordanian control, and Jews can no longer access the cemetery on the Mount of Olives. Where did they bury people? So we have a few really fascinating places that are temporary burial grounds. Okay, one of them is what you see here on the right. This is called Sheikh Badr. Sheikh Badr was an Arab village where today the Knesset and the Supreme Court and Cinema City and International Convention Center, right? All of those things were the area, the land was part of the village of Sheikh Badr. Sheikh Badr, the people fled in 1948. Israel took it over and used it to build all sorts of new buildings, new institutions, but they also used part of it as a temporary cemetery, which is still around today, right? And the graves are all 1949, 1950, 1951. I don't think there's anything there past 53. Okay. We also had a cemetery in the center of town, behind the old Shaarei Tzedek building. Today it's all obscured by construction, but it's still there. Okay. The Sanhedria Cemetery also opened up in the middle of the war. The members of the Hadassah convoy buried there, right? All kinds of strange temporary places until Har Herzl is opened up and Har HaMenuchot. So it's just to finish up a little bit with cemeteries. And just one last thing about the war. Okay. The War of 1948 was the most devastating war that we have ever had in Israel. And I will even include this war. Um, and that's partly the numbers, okay? 6,000 casualties. That's 1% of the population of the time. Okay, 600,000 Jews. So huge numbers, and that's not talking about the wounded and the post-trauma, which they didn't talk about in 1948. People lost their homes, devastation of battle, a very hostile Arab population that's been displaced and is going to keep on attacking. It's the most terrible war, and yet it's also the most hopeful war, right? Because it's unclear when the war begins, and certainly when the state is declared, that we're going to survive, that we're going to come out on the other side with a state of Israel. And that happens. And that's a phenomenal, unbelievable thing that people just cannot wrap their heads around. It's an incredible miracle. Add to the fact that this is 3 years after the Holocaust, right? So it really is a war that is so horrific and yet so unbelievable. Two songs, two poems, really, that come out of this war that really express um, the the sacrifices that we gave. The second one I think is more famous than the first one because of the song, but the first one is a very powerful poem by Natan Alterman. Natan Alterman was the poet of the 30s, 40s, 50s. He wrote very deep and complex poetry, but he also wrote a weekly column on Tur HaShvi'i for the newspaper, which was basically about current events. And this poem was called Magash HaKesef, the silver platter, and the expression at the end is something that we still use today. Okay? And he writes about how did we get this state? What was the silver platter? The land was still under bleary-eyed heavens that crimsoned and dimmed over borders aglow. A nation stood fixed, broken-hearted but breathing to receive her reward heaven sent down below. Ceremony at hand, she made ready by moonlight, all bedecked in her costume of festival and fear. Then before her emerged a young lad, a young maiden, who proceeded to march toward the nation's premier, dressed in uniform drab, heavy boots, legs all weary, as they silently made their way up the incline, without change of clothes, without washing the stain of all the remnants of day and night on the front line. It's really a beautiful translation, but if you can see it online, if you can read it in Hebrew, you should also read it in Hebrew. Enervated and spent, having sworn off all respite, dripping with all the sap of a Hebrew youth's heart, they approached soundlessly and stood rapt at attention, not a sign if alive or if shot half apart. Then the nation inquired, drenched in tears and enchantment, of the two, "Who are you?" As they stood not unnerved, their reply, "We are they, the acclaimed silver platter, upon whom the new state of the Jews has been served." They dropped dead at her feet, and the rest yet to tell will be penned in the Chronicles of Israel. So we're very aware of what we had to give in order to receive this state. Um, and the connections between the soldiers, the bonds are very, very, very strong. Um, the other poem is by Chaim Guri. Chaim Guri also wrote a poem called Hareut, which to translate that as friendship is like very pale. It's deeper than that. Kinship, right? The connections between the soldiers. This, of course, is a song of Bab El Wad, which I'm sure many people are now humming in their heads, right? Bab El Wad was one of the songs of 1948, sung by Yafa Yarkoni, and it's about the siege, the battles for Jerusalem, right? And it says, Bab El Wad, remember our names forever, convoys that broke through on the way to the city, our dead lay on the road edges, the iron skeleton is silent like my comrade. So it's like all wars, like all great wars, great music comes out of this war, and it gives us a little bit of a sense of what the people went through and what were the feelings afterwards. Okay, let's move on to a different part of the story. The Arab refugees. If you're interested in this stuff, by the way, go do yourself a favor. Go on Google, or probably you have to go on Book Finder because I don't know if it's even sold anymore. Find Martin Gilbert's. I just remember what the name of it is. I have it here on my desk. The Atlas of the Arab-Israeli Conflict. Amazing, fantastic maps that make everything very clear. And here, this is the picture of the Arab refugees. Okay, and this is going to be something that is going to continue to plague the new state. Okay, where do they come from? Where do they go? Okay, so Arab refugees, and this is something that's very controversial about the War of Independence. What places were Arabs essentially driven out of? What places were they invited to stay and yet ran away anyway? For example, Haifa, right? Haifa, the mayor of Haifa said, "Stay, Arab residents of Haifa, we want you to stay." Many of them chose to leave instead. Okay. On the other hand, places like Ramla and Lud, they really were driven out. Okay. Where did they go? So the vast majority, as you can see in the map here, the vast majority go to places that were meant to be part of the new Arab state, right? Whether it's the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, 38%, right? 280,000 people, or Gaza, 25%, almost 200,000 people. So you have huge numbers of these refugees, and then smaller numbers that go to Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Egypt. Okay, but These refugees go, many of them still have family within the borders of Israel, still have lands within the borders of Israel. So they're still yearning to come back. Some of them are infiltrating across the border. We're going to see a lot of infiltrations for terror attacks, but some of the infiltrations were my fields are still here, my family is still here. I need to get back and see them. Okay, so that's just important to keep in mind. Something that is still a thorn in our sides is the United Nations Relief Works Agency, founded in late 1949 only for Palestinian refugees. At the time, there were 750,000 registered Palestinian refugees defined by UNRWA as persons whose normal place of residence was Palestine between June 46 and the 15th of May 48, and who lost both home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 conflict. Those 750,000 registered refugees in 1950 have ballooned to 5.5 million today, who are still considered refugees, who are still in camps. There are 68 camps, West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Okay, and we all know the issues that we have of UNRWA and the Palestinians, UNRWA and Hamas, right? And not building permanent homes for people, but rather keeping them in these kind of limbo situation. The picture here is of the UNRWA camp in Shechem. Okay, it's called Balata. It's the largest of all of those in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. Gaza Strip ones are much larger, but this is 23,500 and it is the largest one in Yehuda and Shomron. We're going to come back to the refugees and to the infiltrations, but spend a few minutes on population transfer and also on Jerusalem, which is really its own unique situation. Okay, so we have Jews who are forced out of places like the Old City, places like Sheikh Jarrah, places like Gush Etzion, right, or the settlements near the Dead Sea. We have Arabs that are transferred out, displaced out of, like we said, Ramla, Lud, Sfat, Tveria, but also in Jerusalem, Katamon, Ein Karem, right? And what happens is Israel has a need for housing immigrants. We're going to see that in the next class. We're going to talk about the huge wave of immigrants. And Israel is also not committed to holding on to these properties, keeping these properties in limbo for an unknown amount of time because we do not want to accept the right of return. Okay? We don't want these refugees flooding back into the country. So Israel takes these properties and uses them while the Arabs take the properties that the Jews have abandoned. So the pictures here, you have a house in Katamon, you have houses in Ein Karem, and here you have the Jews leaving out of Zion Gate in the old city. So you definitely have population transfer. Okay, we'll come back to Jerusalem in a minute, but just one more thing about Arab population. Okay, and this is the Druze. Okay, the Druze are a huge exception to the story of the Arabs of Israel, whether they're the Arab refugees or the Arabs who become eventually citizens of Israel. The Druze create a covenant with the Jews from the beginning. Okay? The Druze are a fascinating breakaway group from Islam. They have always been persecuted by Muslims, and therefore, wherever they live, they throw in their lot with that country, right? The Lebanese Druze are loyal to Lebanon, the Syrian Druze are loyal to Syria, and the Israeli Druze are loyal to Israel. Already in 1948, there are Druze volunteers in the army, but it's only an official, they only become mandatorily conscripted into the army in 1956. Okay, there's a law that passed that says male Druze are conscripted into the army, and the Druze agree to that. In the beginning, the leader of the Druze, Sheikh Amin Tarif, shown here in the picture on the right here with Zalman Shazar, okay, receiving a menorah. Not sure what he did with it. Okay, he is against this idea of mandatory conscription. He's worried, maybe a little parallel to the Haredim of today, about Druze values, right? And how are they going to hold on to them in the army? But eventually, other voices win out and they are conscripted into the army. Their are Druze in all different units in the army. There also was a specifically Druze-only battalion called Cherev, which was disbanded 10 years ago. The Druze have a very high rate of draft. 80% of them go to the army. They also are very high rates of combat units, of officers, and the picture here is really showing this connection, this Brit Damim, this covenant of blood. One of the first high-ranking army officers who fell on October 7th or right after October 7th was a Druze officer named Salman Khabaka, right? So we really have a very strong connection between the Druze and the state of Israel and Sahel. So that's already from the beginning. Okay, a little bit about Jerusalem. Not too much because I've done this in other classes, but a little bit. Jerusalem obviously is a very complicated situation because, as we saw, Jerusalem is on the border. Part of it is Israel, part of it is Jordan. The border runs through the center of the city. You have barbed wire, you have no man's land, you have sentries on both sides, right? Israeli and Jordanian. This is a picture over here of Notre Dame, okay? The French convent, which was partly blown up by us in the war to stop Syrian tanks from advancing into the center of Jerusalem, with Israeli soldiers who are on the walls here on the roof, looking over at the old city, at the Jordanian soldiers there. This is another point, another sentry point on the Israeli side in Abu Tor. Okay, the border is drawn at the end of the battles in September 49 48, excuse me, by Moshe Dayan and Abdullah Attal. They sit in an abandoned house in Musrara and they draw on the map with thick markers, which creates a lot of problems because the border is not so clearly defined. You have this very thick line, which translates into tens, sometimes hundreds of feet in real life. Who does it belong to? Israel, Jordan, neither, right? Very complicated. And that's why you have these areas of no man's land, which are dangerous, which are unsanitary, right? The picture over here is Mamila, right? Anybody who's been to Israel in the last 10, 15 years knows the beautiful shopping area of Mamila. This is what Mamila looks like between 48 and 67, or actually even after that. You have areas where you're not allowed to go, barbed wire, walls, mines, etc. In the High Commissioner's Palace, built by the British on a hill in Talpiot, that's this picture here on the left, the United Nations ensconces itself, right? This becomes the United Nations headquarters in Jerusalem, which is still there today, so that they can watch over what's happening, right? Really, what the United Nations wants is international Jerusalem. That does not happen, but they're there in order to deal with all the violations, usually the Jordanians complaining about the Israeli violations of the line of no man's land, of the DMZ, of the demilitarized zone, right? All these things happening in divided Jerusalem. The only crossing point, and you can only cross from Jordan into Israel with very rare exceptions. The only crossing point is the Mandelbaum Gate, today along the route of the light rail. The light rail travels along part of this area of the border. And this is the crossing point. When can you cross from Israel into Jordan? Very few exceptions. As you can see in the picture on the left here, we've got nuns who were coming from Israel, right? And going into Bethlehem for Christmas. The picture on the right here is Samaritans, right? People who Samaritans consider themselves as Jews. We consider them a separate sect. Half of them on Mount Gerizim, which was in Jordan. Half of them in Holon, which was in Israel, and they want to go to Mount Gerizim for Pesach. They do the Passover sacrifice on Mount Gerizim, so that was another exception. They were allowed to go through the Mandelbaum Gate and go up to Mount Gerizim for Pesach. So this is a nice Samaritan Shomroni family leaving. I like how he's taking his chinik with him because you never know if you're going to need that, right? That's always my favorite part of the picture. The other group that goes through the gate, but basically they're going from Israel to Israel, kind of leapfrogging across Jordan, is the Israelis who are stationed on Mount Scopus, right? If you look back at the map for a minute, sorry to make you dizzy, right? But if we look back at the map, we can see, do I have this in the map here? I do, right? Um, Mount Scopus is inside, deep inside Jordanian territory, but it's held onto by Israel. When the borders are drawn, Israel is still holding on to Mount Scopus. They're not giving it up because it's a very, very strategic position. In the ceasefire agreements, the decision was that no soldiers can go up there, only policemen. But everybody knew that this was honored more in the breach than in the reality. And the UN observers, when they would see the Israelis every 2 weeks, could go up and they could replace the soldiers who were up on Mount Scopus. They would say, "What kind of policemen are you? Are you paratroopers? Are you tank officers?" Right? No, but everybody knew they weren't policemen. Mount Scopus was a unique and unusual situation. Eventually, it's going to become very important in the Six-Day War. Okay, let's take a step back. Um, we saw we have many borders. Okay. And because we have so many borders and the borders are very close, much closer than they are today, we have many issues and conflicts on the borders. So the North is probably the quietest of the borders, but we still have issues going on there. Um, in the War of Independence, the kibbutz of Ein Gev, which is on the southeastern shores of the Kinneret, they managed to take the hill above them called Susita, okay, and they managed to hold off the Syrians from taking the kibbutz. And so Ein Gev, even though the whole eastern side of the Kinneret is part of Syria, Ein Gev and a few other small communities nearby remained in Israel. Okay? In order to supply the Israeli soldiers who were up on top of Susita above En Gev, they built a cable car. And this is still up there. Okay? The cables are still up there. The cable car is now at the entrance to Kibbutz En Gev, and this was meant to supply the soldiers in those early months after the war. Okay? The other major issue in the north, well, two major issues. One is the farmers down in the Chula Valley who are constantly threatened by the Syrians in the Golan Heights above. And that continues up until we take the Golan in the Six-Day War. And also an issue that's kind of not as significant in the 1950s, but in the 1960s becomes a major cause of contention, and that's the source waters of the Jordan, right? Who controls the source waters of the Jordan? Who is going to kind of turn off the faucet? And that's what the Arab countries try to do in the 60s. They try a little bit in the 50s, but it's less of an issue. So that's our stories on the border. We also have stories on the eastern border, okay, with Jordan, with many, many, many infiltrations, okay, as well as in the south. And in the south, something that we've been thinking about a lot in the past 2 years, because we've been talking a lot about the communities of Otef Aza, of the Gaza envelope. Okay? Many of these communities are founded in the 40s, in the 50s. They are meant to be a buffer zone, okay, between the Arabs of Gaza, okay, and the Jews of the rest of the state of Israel. They are founded up until the border. One of them is Kibbutz Nachal Oz. It's one of the Nachal communities founded by the Nachal soldiers. There's no fences, okay, because the Nachal what's the word that I want, right? Their motto is that the border is where the plow plows the last furrow. I didn't say that very well, but you know what I mean, right? The border is where the plow stops. And so they would just farm literally up to the border. And so because there was so much proximity to Gaza, okay, there were a lot of infiltrations and attacks. We're going to talk about that. One of the last ones before the story of the Sinai operation was the story of Roe Rothberg. And Roe Rothberg was the security officer of Kibbutz Nachal Oz. A young guy came from Tel Aviv, very idealistic, and comes to live in Kibbutz Nachal Oz. On April 29th, 1956, he hears that there are Arab infiltrators in the fields of Nachal Oz. He rides out to see what's happening. It's actually an ambush, it's a trap. He's murdered. His body is taken into Gaza, right? Unfortunately, stories that repeat themselves. April 29th was also Lag BaOmer. There were 4 weddings that were planned in the kibbutz that day, and Moshe Dayan happened to be in the kibbutz for one of the weddings. And when they buried Roy Rothberg, he gave the eulogy. This very, very powerful eulogy, which again, written in 1956, but really rings true still today. Early yesterday morning, Roe was murdered. The quiet of the spring morning dazzled him, and he did not see those waiting in ambush for him at the edge of the furrow. Let us not cast the blame on the murderers today. Why should we declare their burning hatred for us? For 8 years, they have been sitting in the refugee camps in Gaza, and before their eyes, we have been transforming the lands and the villages where they and their fathers dwelt into our estate. It's not among the Arabs in Gaza, but in our own midst that we must seek Rui's blood. How do we shut our eyes and refuse to look squarely at our fate and see in all its brutality the destiny of our generation? Have we forgotten that this group of young people dwelling at Nachal Oz is bearing the heavy gates of Gaza on its shoulder? Beyond the furrow of the border, a sea of hatred and desire for revenge is swelling, awaiting the day when serenity will dull our path, for the day when we will heed the ambassadors of malevolent hypocrisy who call upon us to lay down our arms. Roi's blood is crying out to us and only to us from his torn body. Although we have sworn 1,000-fold that our blood shall not flow in vain, yesterday again we were tempted, we listened, we believed. We will make our reckoning with ourselves today. We are a generation that settles the land, and without the steel helmet and the cannon's maul, we will not be able to plant a tree and build a home. Let us not be deterred from seeing the loathing that is inflaming and filling the lives of the hundreds of thousands of Arabs who live around us. Let us not avert our eyes lest our arms weaken. This is the fate of our generation. This is our life's choice, to be prepared and armed, strong and determined, lest the sword be stricken from our fist and our lives cut down. The young Ro'i who left Tel Aviv to build his home at the gates of Gaza, to be a wall for us, was blinded by the light in his heart, and he did not see the flash of the sword. The yearning for peace deafened his ear, and he did not hear the voice of murder waiting in ambush. The gates of Gaza weighed too heavily on his shoulders and overcame him. This eulogy has been cited by both the right and the left. The right in saying we can't let down our guard. Our fate is to continue to defend ourselves all the time, to always be aware, to always be prepared. And the left who said, look at what Moshe Dayan is saying. These people hate us. They're never going to not hate us. What are we going to do about that? Right? And the communities in the Otef, by the way, were living and are still living this dialectic all the time. Right? They're living on the border. They know they have to defend themselves, but many of them were peace activists, and some still are. Right? Were involved in outreach among the Arabs of Gaza. Right? It's 2 different directions that we go in. Um, Throughout the 1950s, we have literally thousands of infiltrations from Jordan, 6,000 infiltrations. As we said, some of the, and we also have infiltrations from Gaza. 6,000 is only from Jordan, okay? But we also have many, many from Gaza. Some of them are innocent, like we said, to see family, to see fields. Many of them are terror attacks. In the 5 years between 51 and 56, 400 Israelis are killed by terror infiltrations. Okay? We have, unfortunately, many, many, many stories. I brought you 2 here that are very powerful. The picture on the left here is of the very challenging road in the Negev. It's called the Scorpion's Ascent, Ma'ale Akrabim. It's actually an old Roman road. And until newer roads were built, this was the road that went from Eilat up into the Negev. And as you can see, it's a very challenging, winding road. On March 17th, 1954, there was a passenger bus coming from Eilat. It had 14 passengers and a driver. They were ambushed and they were attacked. 11 of the 14 were murdered, okay, including the driver. Terrible, horrific murders, including a rape, including children. 4 survived. One of them died of his wounds years later. Okay, so this is a horrific, horrific terror attack. The picture on the right had a lower death toll, but it was a very shocking nonetheless. This is another community in the Gaza envelope, Hatish, okay, which was spared on October 7th, but was not spared in March 1955. There's a wedding in the community, and these these communities, not Nahal Oz and communities like that. Those are mostly Israeli born, but we have many, many communities that were founded in the 1950s of new immigrants. Like I said, we'll talk about this next time. This is a community of new immigrants from North Africa, from Kurdistan, from Morocco, from various places. And during a wedding, infiltrators from Gaza come and attack with grenades. 24 people are injured, one is killed. Ben Gurion comes to the site because he's worried, right? He knows these are not, the thought was, oh, the native Israelis, they can handle everything. They're not going to run away. But the immigrants, they're going to be scared and they're going to run away, which actually was not true. These guys stayed. But Ben Gurion comes to reassure them and to tell them that their blood is not hefker and don't worry, and we're going to do something about this. Right? And this is said many times over the course of the early 50s. What do we do about this? Okay, so the theory is that every time there is an attack like this, or every few times, or if it's a particularly horrific attack, there has to be a reprisal. A reprisal attack where we send in our soldiers to attack the village that's nearest to whatever happened. Okay. The most infamous reprisal attack, and one that kind of brought these attacks, didn't bring them to an end, but definitely limited them, is the story of Kibya. Right, you can see on my map here, the area here here's Modi'in. Okay, so Kibya is directly north of Modi'in. This is the green line. Okay, so in 1953, when this story happens, this is Jordan, this is Israel. Um, Terrorists come from the town of Rantis, north of Kibya. They cross over, they infiltrate into Israel, they go to Yehud. Okay, this is Yehud. And they attack and they murder a woman and two children. Okay, and Ben Gurion says this has to be answered with great force so that the Arabs understand that they can't do this. And he sends out Unit 101. We're going to talk about what they are in a minute, but he sends out Unit 101 to do a reprisal attack on Kibya, on the nearest community nearby. 45 houses are blown up. 69 Arabs are killed, including women and children. There is outrage, both internationally, obviously, but in Israel as well. So much outrage that Ben Gurion actually goes on the radio and tells the Israeli people, no, 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 these are not Israeli soldiers who did this. This was civilians out for revenge. He outright lies, right? Because this is a very, very shocking thing. Sharon, right, Ariel Sharon, who you can see in the picture here, who's the commander of the unit of Unit 101, said he did not know that the houses were occupied and when they blew them up. But basically, what happens after Kibbutz is that the decision is made, no more reprisal raids on civilians. Doesn't mean there aren't reprisal raids, but not on civilians. Now, what's the story of Unit 101? This is, like we said, a very short-lived and very exclusive unit. It's founded by Ariel Sharon, who was kind of a very maverick commander, fought and was terribly wounded in 1948, recovers, fights in the Sinai, defies his superiors, and eventually becomes prime minister, is involved with the whole story of giving away Gush Katif, right? But in this story,
Excuse me,
young man,
Sharon is the reason we won in 1973 because he
okay,
went against.
thank you, but yeah, well, save comments for the end. Um, Sharon and 50 very, very carefully chosen um, soldiers create this very elite unit. It's essentially the precursor to what we today call Sayeret Matkal, right? The real elite units of the army. One of his right-hand men is the very young-looking fellow to the left of him, somebody named Meir Hartzion. Very interesting character, very, very, very daring. When he's 17 and his sister is 15, they go on a tiul in the north where they cross over into Syria. This is pre-1948. They cross over into no, sorry, right after 1948, they cross over into Syria. They're captured, they're interrogated, they're imprisoned and tortured for a month, and then he's set free. It doesn't stop him. He is the consummate Ish Shetach, right? He knows the land. He knows where everything is. He travels all over. He's one of the founders of these elite units of Sayeret Matkal. Unit 101 is created specifically to do these kind of undercover reprisal missions. It's disbanded after a half a year and incorporated into the paratroopers, okay, into a unit of the paratroopers. And in February 1955, this unit does a very important mission called Black Arrow, Chet Shachor. You can go to, well, you can't go today because today it's a closed military zone, but there is a memorial to the fighters from these units that did these reprisal raids. You can see this in the picture, but Chet Shachor was an attack where they infiltrated into Gaza, attacked an Egyptian army camp, took the army camp, took the water supply of the Egyptians. It was incredible bravery. 8 Israeli casualties, 36 Egyptian casualties. What was the cost? Meaning we have a cost of our soldiers, but there also was a cost that Egypt is starting to feel threatened. And they do a few things. Okay. They make an arms deal with the Czechs. Right. Already, even before that, in July 1956, Nasser, who's the new leader of Egypt, nationalizes the Suez Canal, meaning it is no longer international waterways. It belongs only to Egypt, blocks the Straits of Tiran. And this is what's going to lead to what's going to close out our era on a security level. Okay. When Nasser closes off the Suez Canal and the Straits of Tiran, this is not only bad for us, it's also bad for the British and the French, right? They're really the ones who had started the Suez Canal. And they come up with this very unusual plan. Okay? The French say, we will supply arms to you, Israel. You, Israel, will advance towards the canal. We, the British and the French, will intervene, demand a ceasefire. Nasser will be deposed. Everybody wins except for Nasser. And that's what we're going to do. And Israel, this is a very big challenge. Can we do this? Are we capable of this? We have not had a major military operation since the War of Independence. Yes, we have these new French arms. Yes, we have the support of the British and the French. We do not have the support of the United States. Can it be done? And we agree to do it. Okay. Why do we agree to do it? Not to get territory. Ben-Gurion specifically says it's not to get territory. We want Sharm el-Sheikh down here in the south so that we can ensure that the Straits of Tiran remain open and we have open access to the Suez Canal and to shipping. And the war begins. October 29th, okay, is the beginning. November 7th is the end. We advance in a few different lines in the north here from Rafiah towards El Arish down towards the Suez Canal. Supply lines going across the desert, the Sinai Desert. Another line going towards a very important place called the Mitla Pass, which Ariel Sharon takes, even though he's not allowed to, right? And then he doubles back down and goes down toward Sharm el-Sheikh. Meanwhile, more Israeli troops go south of Eilat and meet in Sharm el-Sheikh. What's the outcome? November 2nd, Gaza, Egyptians in Gaza surrender. November 4th, we take Sharm and we open up the Straits of Tiran. November 5th, the British and the French attack Suez Canal. Okay, and November 7th, come. Okay, the outcome is negative and positive. Okay, Nasser stays in power. Egypt is humiliated, which perhaps causes it to do something very similar 10 years later, right? Close the Suez Canal and the Straits of Tiran in 1967. The world condemns us. They also condemn the British and the French. We have casualties, 172 killed, 817 wounded. Okay. We agree to withdraw from all the territory that we had taken on the condition that the Straits of Tiran stay open and Gaza is no longer a base for terror. Okay, so these are our negatives. We've withdrawn, we have casualties, we have world condemnation, and Nasser is not kicked out of power. And Golda in the UN, right? We started with Golda, we'll end with Golda. She says the Arabs enjoy the rights of war while we have to unilaterally keep the peace. She says this is a very unfair situation. They do whatever they want, and we, as again, double standard, we're meant to keep the peace. However, the Sinai campaign had some very positive outcomes. Okay. Perhaps the most positive is we show our military might. We are tested and we are proven, right? The Arabs will no longer see us as a blip on the screen. We are able to fight back, to do a large scale invasion. We took the entire Sinai, and that's a very powerful message. Okay. We also capture and keep 40 Soviet made tanks, 60 armored cars, right? This adds to our weaponry. We keep the straits open until 1967. And unlike all the reprisal raids, which don't actually succeed, there's very little terror from Gaza for the next 10 years. So Sinai is really very much a turning point in the way our neighbors, our enemies perceive us, right? And in our security situations. That's really what we're going to do about security. Next time, we're really going to go more into human story and the story of Aliyah. But let's take a look. We have many comments. Are they comments only about muting? Let's see. Yeah, Operation Magic Carpet, we're not talking about yet. We will talk about. Um, yes, okay. Double standard, India and Pakistan, of course, right? So we always have double standards, right? Unknown soldiers stones in the cemetery where Naomi Shemer is buried, right in the Kinneret cemetery, because also malaria, people who had no relatives, right? Stories like that. Magasha Kesef was set to music by Yechezkel Kaufman. Okay, I did not know that. And he didn't take any payment. Very nice. Okay, we have to listen. Thank you, Susanna. Always giving us good things. Why did the UN set up a parallel organization for the Jewish refugees? Right? Very good question. Golda Meir says to the UN in that same speech, I saw Gaza. I saw the United Nations camps. Look what we did with our refugees. We're going to talk about that next time. We did it. We built Ma'abarot, we built transit camps, but we said we're not leaving them in camps. We are going to build them homes and neighborhoods. Yes, we made a lot of mistakes, but we managed to settle our refugees. We did not rely on the United Nations. Okay. Notre Dame is a hospital, but also a convent. Mamila, right? Mamila was auto repair and Hebrew U buildings, exactly. A UN building on the Hill of Evil Council, yes, correct. The UN wants to be in Jerusalem because they don't recognize it as the capital of Israel. They want to be there to, supervise the international Jerusalem, which didn't actually really happen. Okay. The UN building, yeah, I would love to go inside and see the UN building. Nobody's allowed in there. I don't know about this book, but it sounds interesting. Changing of the guard and stockpiling arms, of course, right? That's also very important. Um, Israel did give back some land, right? But again, there were all kinds of details to the ceasefire agreements. I did not go into that. Roe, yes, April 29th, 1956. And that's it. Anybody else who wants to join in, but we're already 4 minutes late. But thank you, everybody, for sticking with me at this very quick pace. Next
you.
week, maybe I'll go a
Thank
little
you.
Thank
slower.
you. Thank
Unlikely,
you.
but
Excellent.
maybe.
Wonderful.
Who
Excellent.
knows?
Shulie.
Thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Salam.
Chodesh
Chodesh Tov.
Tov. Next week,
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov. You're right.
Shulie.
Chodesh Tov. Thank you.
Shulie.